Another Universal monster movie, which means yes, I saw this with my dad. If you didn't know, my dad is a big fan of the classic Universal monsters, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and yes, Count Dracula. So before we saw this, we sat down and watched the 1931 classic Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. And would you believe me if I told you that that movie has like no musical score at all? I'm being serious, that was certainly an experience. But Bela Lugosi's Dracula is a classic for a reason. And man, let me tell you something, I am so glad to have watched that before seeing this. Renfield. So Renfield is an interesting take on Dracula. The movie takes place in present day in New Orleans, and it centers around Nicholas Hoult as Robert Montague Renfield. Who's that? Well, alright, for those of you who don't know your Dracula lore, Renfield is pretty much Dracula's servant. I don't have to explain who Dracula is, right? Renfield serves the vampire Dracula. He also has a little bit of his power, so he brings Dracula his victims so he can stay alive forever. And now they've been doing this for about 90 years. In this movie, it's a bit of an abusive, toxic relationship. Renfield is the victim, Dracula's really controlling, and so naturally Renfield wants to get out of that. And he wants to live a nice normal life, no one can blame him, cause Count Dracula is a douchebag. And so on with the movie. And I enjoyed this movie. I mean, it's ridiculous, oh yeah. It is not meant to be taken seriously like at all. It's a popcorn movie, it's not really even a horror movie. You would think this being Universal monsters it would lean on the side of horror, it really doesn't. This is an action comedy. But the movie knows that though, and it's not trying to be anything else. Alright, Nicholas Hoult as Renfield, I actually thought he was great. Cause we all love characters like this, you know, we all love to root for the underdog. He is oppressed in this terrible relationship he has with his boss. Yeah, he's not crazy, he's not like Dwight Fry in the 1931 film who was all like, Although he does do that laugh once, which is a great throwback. But no, you really feel for the guy. And then he comes across Awkwafina as Officer Rebecca Quincy. She has her own struggle going on, and maybe this is just a personal taste thing with me, but everything I've seen Awkwafina in so far, that includes Shang-Chi, I've just never been the biggest fan of her characters. I mean, I didn't mind her story arc in this movie. I actually thought it mixed in really well, but it's just her character, I don't know. I guess I'm just not the biggest fan of Awkwafina. Although I will say in this movie she did the best job I've seen her do so far. She wasn't just there to be funny, she was actually a cog, a piece of this game. So I didn't think she was that bad. And then of course there is the man who never knows he's being filmed anymore.
Some call me the Dark One, others the Lord of Death. To most, I am Dracula.
Nicolas Cage plays Count Dracula. Dude is awesome in this movie. Cause I said it once and I'll say it again, he is a dick. I thought Nick Cage was a great Count Dracula. He's really evil, he does a pretty good Dracula voice. He just has that presence where wherever he walks into a room, he demands your full attention. And he gets it.
Let's eat.
That being said, I also want to talk about Ben Schwartz in this movie, because I didn't even know he was going to be in it. So when he showed up, I was like, oh, Sonic. He plays a criminal, Teddy Lobo is his name. He's another douchebag, and he did a great job too. It was just so funny, because whenever he talks, I hear Sonic from now on. Yeah, I never watched Parks and Rec. So when he's going off doing really bad things, I'm like, oh, Sonic, why? It was funny. I'll tell you what I really liked about this movie is the fact that it does touch on toxic relationships and how harmful they can be. Which is funny because the last Universal Monster movie that came out that I reviewed anyway touched on the same topic. I think Universal Monster movies these days have found their niche. Hey, they're 2 for 2. It works in this one. Again, you really root for Renfield because he's an alright, decent guy. And this Dracula is a complete douchebag who controls him. This movie does a good job at portraying that kind of relationship. I mean, Renfield goes to this support group, and we do hear a couple of other stories from people who are going through similar things. This movie just exaggerates that with Count Dracula. I thought that was a pretty good direction to go with these characters that have been around for decades upon decades. That makes these characters relevant to today's modern age. So props to whoever conceived that idea. And then we come to the action. Yeah, there are action scenes in this movie, since Renfield has a little bit of Dracula's power, and this goes back to the original Bram Stoker book. Renfield eats insects, you know, flies, cockroaches, and that's where he gets his superpower from. And so that's how it happens in this movie. Renfield will eat a bug, and then he and Awkwafina will just go to town on dudes. We're talking pretty violently too. This movie is rated a hard R. Choreography-wise, I thought it was pretty awesome. I mean, they'll be breaking bones, you hear the bones crack, the sound in this movie I thought was really good. A lot of times I was like, ooh, that had to hurt. But then with the action comes the gore, and this is just my opinion here, but I thought the gore was way too gratuitous. This shit wasn't realistic at all. There's just so much blood coming out of these dudes, it never even grossed me out because it was just ridiculous. It was unrealistic, and the blood didn't even look that real. It looked really fake actually, and that did kind of take me out of it. I mean, there's a point where there is just this explosion of blood, and my dad and I, we both looked at each other and we were like, yeah, right. Alright, yeah, okay, this movie's not going for realism at all. But my point is, the movie did not have to have this much gore. I felt like it was gore for the sake of gore. It wasn't important at all. I probably would have enjoyed the movie a lot more if the gore had been realistic. I mean, I enjoyed it, but that was the movie's biggest flaw, and thus I had to address it. And the music in this movie. Marco Beltrami did the score, and it's really nothing special. I'm probably not going to remember a single note from the soundtrack. There was one cool track that played during an action scene. That was alright, but the rest of it's pretty generic. Didn't impress me all that much. But in the end, I actually really enjoyed Renfield. I love the characters. Nicholas Hoult, Nicolas Cage, these two Nicks, they did a great job. I love the movie's central message about abusive relationships. I've noticed that more and more movies are touching on that these days, as they should. The movie's funny. There's some really good humor in here. My dad and I were laughing out loud quite a few times, pretty much throughout the entire movie actually. And the action was choreographed really well. Just visually a big minus point. And the score was forgettable. For Renfield, I will say, go see this movie while it's in theaters. Did y'all see that Last Voyage of Demeter trailer? I had no idea there was even another Dracula movie coming out this year. Guess my dad and I will have to see that too. So, Renfield, have you seen it yet? What are your thoughts on it? And what is your favorite iteration of Bram Stoker's Count Dracula? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And of course, thank you for subscribing. Alright, that was the Count from Sesame Street, but he's still a vampire, so it's still thematic. Peace!